Chapter 21 of The Wolf Leader by Alexandre DUMAS, translated by Alfred, 1852 to 1929. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 21. The Genius of Evil. The next evening, about 9 o'clock, a man might be seen walking along the Puits-Sarrasin road and making for the Alcière forest path. It was Thibault, on his way to pay a last visit to the hut, and to see if any remains of it had been left by the fire. A heap of smoking cinders alone marked the place where it had stood, and as Thibault came in sight of it, he saw the wolves, as if he had appointed them to meet him there, forming an immense circle round the ruins and looking upon them with an expression of mournful anger. They seemed to understand that by destroying this poor hut, made of earth and branches, the one who, by the compact with the black wolf, had been given them for master and had been made a victim. As Thibault entered the circle, all the wolves gave simultaneously a long and sinister-sounding howl, as if to make him understand that they were ready to help in avenging him. Thibault went and sat down on the spot where the hearth had stood. It was recognizable from a few blackened stones still remaining, which were otherwise uninjured, and by a higher heap of cinders just at that spot. He stayed there for some minutes, absorbed in his unhappy thoughts. But he was not reflecting that the ruin which he saw around him was the consequence and the punishment of his jealous and covetous desires, which had gone on gathering strength. He felt neither repentance nor regret. That which dominated all other feeling in him was his satisfaction at the thought of being henceforth able to render to his fellow creatures evil for evil, his pride in having, thanks to his terrible auxiliaries, the power to fight against those who persecuted him. And as the wolves continued their melancholy howling, "Yes, my friends," said Thibault, "yes, your howls answer to the cry of my heart. My fellow creatures have destroyed my hut. They have cast to the winds the ashes of the tools wherewith I earned my daily bread. Their hatred pursues me as it pursues you. I expect from them neither mercy nor pity. We are their enemies as they are ours, and I will have neither mercy nor compassion on them. Come then, let us go from this hut to the castle and carry thither the destruction which they have brought home to me." And then the master of the wolves, like a chief of banditti, followed by his desperadoes, set off with his pack in quest of pillage and carnage. This time it was neither red deer nor fallow deer, nor any timid game of which they were in pursuit. Sheltered by the darkness of the night, Thibault first directed his course to the Château of Vez, for there was lodged his chief enemy. The Baron had 3 farms belonging to the estate, stables filled with horses and others filled with cows, and the park was full of sheep. All these places were attacked the first night, and on the morrow 2 horses, 4 cows, and 10 sheep were found killed. The Baron was doubtful at first if this could be the work of the beasts against which he waged so fierce a warfare. There seemed something partaking rather of intelligence and revenge in it than of the mere unreasoning attacks of a pack of wild animals. Still it seemed manifest that the wolves must have been the aggressors, judging by the marks of the teeth on the carcasses and the footprints left on the ground. Next night the Baron set watchers to lie in wait, but Thibault and his wolves were at work on the farther side of the forest. This time it was the stables and parks of Soucy and of Viviers which were decimated, and the following night those of Bourson and Yvors. The work of annihilation once begun must be carried out with desperate determination, and the master never left his wolves now. He slept with them in their dens and lived in the midst of them, stimulating their thirst for blood. Many a woodman, many a heath-gatherer came face to face in the thickets with the menacing white teeth of a wolf, and was either carried off and eaten, or just saved his life by the aid of his courage and his bill-hook. Guided by a human intelligence, the wolves had become organized and disciplined, and were far more formidable than a band of discontented soldiery let loose in a conquered country. The terror of them became general. No one dared go beyond the towns and villages unarmed. Horses and cattle were all fed inside the stables, and the men themselves, their work done, waited for one another so as not to go about singly. The Bishop of Soissons ordered public prayer to be made, asking God to send a thaw, for the unusual ferocity of the wolves was attributed to the great quantity of snow that had fallen. But the report also went about that the wolves were incited to their work and led about by a man, that this man was more indefatigable, more cruel and insatiable than the wolves themselves, that in imitation of his companions he ate raw flesh and quenched his thirst in blood, and the people went further and said that this man was Thibault. The bishop pronounced sentence of excommunication against the former shoemaker. The Lord of Vez, however, had little faith in the thunders of the church being of much effect, unless supported by some well-conducted hunting. He was somewhat cast down at so much blood being spilt, and his pride was sorely hurt that his, the Grand Master's, own cattle should have suffered so heavily from the very wolves he was especially appointed to destroy. At the same time he could not but feel a secret delight at the thought of the triumphant view halloos in store for him, and of the fame which he could not fail to win among all sportsmen of repute. His passion for the chase, excited by the way in which his adversaries the wolves had so openly entered upon the struggle, became absolutely overpowering. He allowed neither respite nor repose, he took no sleep himself, and ate his meals in the saddle. All night long he scoured the country in company with L'Eveillé and Engoulevent, who in consideration of his marriage had been raised to the rank of pricker. And the dawn had no sooner appeared before he was again in the saddle, ready to start and chase the wolf until it was too dark to distinguish the hounds. But alas, all his knowledge of the art of venery, all his courage, all his perseverance were lost labor. He occasionally brought down some wretched cub, some miserable beast eaten with mange, some imprudent glutton which had so gorged itself with carnage that its breath would not hold out after an hour or two's run. But the larger, well-grown wolves, with their thick dark coats, their muscles like steel springs, and their long slender feet, not one of these lost a hair in the war that was being made upon them. Thanks to Thibault, they met their enemies in arms on nearly equal ground. As the Baron of Vez remained forever with his dogs, so did Thibault with his wolves. After a night of sack and pillage, he kept the pack awake on the watch to help the one that the Baron had started. This wolf, again following Thibault's instructions, had recourse at first to stratagem. It doubled, crossed its tracks, waded in the streams, leapt up into the bending trees so as to make it more difficult still for huntsmen and hounds to follow the scent, and finally, when it felt its powers failing, it adopted bolder measures and went straight ahead. Then the other wolves and their master intervened. At the least sign of hesitation on the part of the hounds, they managed so cleverly to put them on the wrong scent that it required an experienced eye to detect that the dogs were not all following up the same track, and nothing less than the Baron's profound knowledge could decide which was the right one. Even he sometimes was mistaken. Again, the wolves in their turn followed the huntsmen. It was a pack hunting a pack. Only the one hunted in silence, which made it far the more formidable of the two. Did a tired hound fall behind or another get separated from the main body, it was seized and killed in an instant. And Engoulevent, whom we have had occasion to mention several times before, and who had taken poor Marcotte's place, having hastened one day to the help of one of his hounds that was uttering cries of distress, was himself attacked and only owed his life to the swiftness of his horse. It was not long before the Baron's pack was decimated. His best hounds were nearly dead with fatigue, and his more second-rate ones had perished by the wolves' teeth. The stable was in no better condition than the kennel. Bayard was foundered, Tancred had sprained a tendon leaping over a ditch, and a strained fetlock had placed Valoris on the list of invalids. Sultan, luckier than his three companions, had fallen honorably on the field of battle, having succumbed to a 16 hours' run under the weight of his gigantic master, who never for a moment lost courage, notwithstanding the fact that the dead bodies of his finest and most faithful servitors lay heaped around him. The Baron, following the example of the noble-hearted Romans who exhausted the resources of military art against the Carthaginians, who were forever reappearing as enemies, the Baron, I repeat, changed his tactics and tried what battues could accomplish. He called on all available men among the peasants, and beat up the game throughout the forest with such a formidable number of men that not so much as a hair was left in its form near any spot which they had passed. But Thibault made it his business to find out beforehand where these battues were going to take place, and if he ascertained that the beaters were on the side of the forest towards Viviers or Soucy, he and his wolves made an excursion to Borson or Ivors, and if the Baron and his men were busy near Haramont or Longpré, the people of Courcy and Vertefeuille were made painfully aware of Thibault and his wolves. In vain the Lord of Vez drew his cordon at night round the suspected enclosures, so as to begin the attack with daylight. Never once did his men succeed in starting a wolf, for not once did Thibault make a mistake in his calculations. If by chance he had not been well informed, and was uncertain in what direction the Baron and his men were going, he called all his wolves together, sending express couriers after them as the night set in. He then led them unobserved down the wooded lane leading to Lissart-l'Abbesse, which at that time ran between the forest of Compiègne and the forest of Villers-Cotterets, and so was able to pass from one to the other. This state of things went on for several months. Both the Baron and Thibault carried out the task each had set before himself with equally passionate energy. The latter, like his adversary, seemed to have required some supernatural power, whereby he was able to resist fatigue and excitement, and this was the more remarkable, seeing that during the short intervals of respite accorded by the Lord of Vez, the wolf leader was by no means at peace in himself. It was not that the terrible deeds in which he was an active agent, and at which he presided, filled him exactly with horror, for he thought them justifiable. He threw the responsibility of them, he said, on to those who had forced him to commit them, but there were moments of failing spirit, for which he could not account, when he went about in the midst of his ferocious companions, feeling gloomy, morose, and heavy-hearted. Again, the image of Agnelette would rise before him, seeming to him like the personification of his own past life, honest and laborious, peaceful and innocent, and more than that, he felt he loved her more than he had ever thought it possible for him to love anybody. At times he would weep at the thought of all his lost happiness, at others he was seized with a wild fit of jealousy against the one to whom she now belonged, she who at one time might, if he had liked, have been his. One day the Baron, in order to prepare some fresh means of destruction, had been forced for the while to leave the wolves in peace. Thibault, who was in one of the moods we have just described, wandered forth from the den where he lived in company with the wolves. It was a splendid summer's night, and he began to rove about the woodlands, where the moon was lighting up the trunks of the trees, dreaming of the time when he trod the mossy carpet underfoot free from trouble and anxiety, until at last the only happiness which was now left him, forgetfulness of the present, stole over his senses. Lost in this sweet dream of his earlier life, he was all of a sudden aroused by a cry of distress from somewhere near at hand. He was now so accustomed to such sounds that ordinarily he would have paid no attention to it, but his heart was for the moment softened by the recollection of Agnelette, and he felt more disposed than usual to pity. As it happened also, he was near the place where he had first seen the gentle child, and this helped to awaken his kinder nature. He ran to the spot whence the cry had come, and as he leaped from the underwood into the deep forest lane near Ham, he saw a woman struggling with an immense wolf, which had thrown her on the ground. Thibault could not have said why he was so agitated at this sight, nor why his heart beat more violently than usual. He rushed forward, and seizing the animal by the throat, hurled it away from its victim, and then lifting the woman in his arms, he carried her to the side of the lane and laid her on the slope. Here a ray of moonlight breaking through the clouds fell on the face of the woman he had saved, and Thibault saw that it was Agnelette. Near to the spot was the spring in which Thibault had once gazed at himself, and had seen the first red hair. He ran to it, took up water in his hands, and threw it into the woman's face. Agnelette opened her eyes and gave a cry of terror, and tried to rise and flee. "What?" cried the wolf leader, as if he were still Thibault the shoemaker. "You do not know me again, Agnelette?" "Ah, yes, indeed I know you, Thibault, and it is because I know who you are," cried the young woman, "that I am afraid." Then throwing herself on her knees and clasping her hands, "Oh, do not kill me, Thibault," she cried, "do not kill me. It would be such dreadful trouble for the poor old grandmother. Thibault, do not kill me." The wolf leader stood overcome with consternation. Up to this hour he had not fully realized the hideous renown which he had gained, but the terror which the sight of him inspired in the woman who had loved him and whom he still loved filled him with a horror of himself. "I kill you, Agnelette," he said, "just when I have snatched you from death? Oh, how you must hate and despise me for such a thought to enter your head." "I do not hate you, Thibault," said the young woman, "but I hear such things about you that I feel afraid of you." "And do they say nothing of the infidelity which has led Thibault to commit such crimes?" "I do not understand you," said Agnelette, looking at Thibault with her large eyes, blue as the heavens. "What?" exclaimed Thibault. "You do not understand that I loved you, that I adored you, Agnelette, and that the loss of you sent me out of my mind?" "If you loved me, if you adored me, Thibault, what prevented you from marrying me?" The spirit of evil," muttered Thibault. "I too loved you," continued the young woman, "and I suffered cruelly waiting for you." Thibault heaved a sigh. "You loved me, Agnelette?" he asked. "Yes," replied the young woman with her soft voice and gentle eyes. "But now all is over," said Thibault, "and you love me no more." "Thibault," answered Agnelette, "I no longer love you because it is no longer right to love you, but one cannot always forget one's first love as one would wish." "Agnelette," cried Thibault, trembling all over, "be careful what you say." "Why should I be careful what I say, since it is the truth?" said the girl, with an innocent shake of the head. "The day you told me that you wished to make me your wife, I believed you, Thibault, for why should I think that you would lie to me when I had just done you a service? Then later I met you, but I did not go in search of you. You came to me, you spoke words of love to me, you were the first to refer to the promise that you had made me, and it was not my fault either, Thibault, that I was afraid of that ring which you wore, which was large enough for you, and yet, oh, it was horrible, not big enough for one of my fingers." "Would you like me not to wear this ring any more?" Thibault said. "Would you like me to throw it away?" And he began trying to pull it off his fingers, but as it had been too small to go on Agnelette's finger, so now it was too small to be taken off Thibault's. In vain he struggled with it, and tried to move it with his teeth. The ring seemed riveted to his finger for all eternity. Thibault saw that it was no use trying to get rid of it. It was a token of compact between himself and the black wolf, and with a sigh he let his arms fall hopelessly to his sides. "That day," went on Agnelette, "I ran away. I know that I was wrong to do so, but I was no longer mistress of myself after seeing that ring, and more still—" She lifted her eyes as she spoke, looking timidly up at Thibault's hair. Thibault was bareheaded, and by the light of the moon Agnelette could see that it was no longer a single hair that shone red as the flames of hell, but that half the hair on Thibault's head was now of this devil's color. "Oh!" she exclaimed, drawing back. "Thibault, Thibault, what has happened to you since I last saw you?" "Agnelette!" cried Thibault, throwing himself down with his face to the ground and holding his head between his hands. "I could not tell any human creature, not even a priest, what has happened to me since then, but to Agnelette, all I can say is, Agnelette, Agnelette, have pity on me, for I have been most unhappy." Agnelette went up to him and took his hands in hers. "Did you love me then? You did love me?" he cried. "What can I do, Thibault?" said the girl with the same sweetness and innocence as before. "I took you at your word, and every time I heard someone knocking at our hut door, I thought it was you come to say to the old grandmother, 'Mother, I love Agnelette. Agnelette loves me. Will you give her to me for my wife?' Then, when I went and opened the door and found that it was not you, I used to go into a corner and cry." "And now, Agnelette, now?" "Now," she answered, "now, Thibault, it may seem strange, but in spite of all the terrible tales that are told about you, I have not been really frightened. I was sure that you could not wish any harm to me, and I was walking boldly through the forest, when that dreadful beast from which you saved me suddenly sprang upon me." "But how is it that you are near your old home? Do you not live with your husband?" "We lived together for a while at Vez, but there was no room there for the grandmother, and so I said to my husband, 'The grandmother must be thought of first. I must go back to her. When you wish to see me, you will come.'" "And he consented to that arrangement?" "Not at first, but I pointed out to him that the grandmother is 70 years of age, that if she were only to live another 2 or 3 years, God grant it may be more, it would only be 2 or 3 years of some extra trouble for us, whereas in all probability we had long years of life before us. Then he understood that it was right to give to those that had least." But all the while that Agnelette was giving this explanation, Thibault could think of nothing but that the love she once had for him was not yet dead. "So," said Thibault, "you loved me, and so, Agnelette, you could love me again?" "That is not possible now, because I belong to another." "Agnelette, Agnelette, only say that you love me." "No, Thibault, if I loved you, I should do everything in the world to hide it from you." "And why?" cried Thibault, "why? You do not know my power. I know that I have only a wish or two left, but with your help, by combining these wishes together, I could make you as rich as a queen. We could leave the country, leave France, Europe. There are large countries of which you do not even know the names, Agneletta, called America and India. They are paradises, with blue skies, tall trees, and birds of every kind. Agneletta, say that you will come with me. Nobody will know that we have gone off together. Nobody will know where we are. Nobody will know that we love one another. Nobody will know even that we are alive." "Fly with you, Thibault?" said Agneletta, looking at the wolf leader as if she had but half understood what he said. "Do you forget that I no longer belong to myself? Do you not know that I am married?" "What does that matter?" said Thibault, "if it is I whom you love, and if we can live happily together." "Oh, Thibault, Thibault, what are you saying?" "Listen," went on Thibault, "I am going to speak to you in the name of this world and the next. Do you wish to save me, Agneletta, body and soul? If so, do not resist my pleading. Have pity on me. Come with me. Let us go somewhere together where we shall no longer hear these howlings or breathe this atmosphere of reeking flesh. And if it scares you to think of being a rich grand lady somewhere, then where I can again be Thibault the workman, Thibault poor but beloved, and therefore Thibault happy in his hard work, someplace where Agneletta will have no other husband but me." "Ah, Thibault, I was ready to become your wife, and you scorned me." "Do not remember my sins, Agneletta, which have been so cruelly punished." "Thibault, another has done what you were not willing to do. He took the poor young girl, he burdened himself with the poor old blind woman, he gave a name to the one and bread to the other. He had no ambition beyond that of gaining my love. He desired no dowry beyond my marriage vow. Can you think of asking me to return evil for good? Do you dare to suggest that I should leave the one who has given me such proof of his love for the one who has given me proof only of his indifference?" "But what matters still, Agneletta, since you do not love him, and since you do love me?" "Thibault, do not turn and twist my words to make them appear to say what they do not. I said that I still preserved my friendship for you. I never said that I did not love my husband. I should like to see you happy, my friend. Above all, I should like to see you abjure your evil ways and repent of your sins. And last of all, I wish that God may have mercy upon you, and that you may be delivered from that spirit of evil of which you spoke just now. For this I pray night and morning on my knees, but even that I may be able to pray for you, I must keep myself pure. If the voice that supplicates for mercy is to rise to God's throne, it must be an innocent one. Above all, I must scrupulously keep the oath which I swore at his altar." On hearing these decisive words from Agneletta, Thibault again became fierce and morose. "Do you not know, Agneletta, that it is very imprudent of you to speak to me here like that?" "And why, Thibault?" asked the young woman. "We are alone here together. It is dark, and not a man of the open would dare to come into the forest at this hour. And no, the king is not more master in his kingdom than I am here." "I do not understand you, Thibault." "I mean that having prayed, implored, and conjured, I can now threaten." "You threaten?" "What I mean is," continued Thibault, paying no heed to Agnelette's words, "that every word you speak does not excite my love for you more than it rouses my hatred towards him. In short, I mean that it is imprudent of the lamb to irritate the wolf, when the lamb is in the power of the wolf." "I told you, Thibault, before, that I started to walk through the forest without any feeling of fear at meeting you. As I was coming to, I felt a momentary terror, remembering involuntarily what I had heard said about you. But at this moment, Thibault, you will try in vain to make me turn pale." Thibault flung both hands up to his head. "Do not talk like that," he said. "You cannot think what the devil is whispering to me, and what an effort I have to make to resist his voice." "You may kill me if you like," replied Agneletta, "but I will not be guilty of the cowardice which you ask of me. You may kill me, but I shall remain faithful to my husband. You may kill me, but I shall pray to God to help him as I die." "Do not speak his name, Agneletta. Do not make me think about that man." "You can threaten me as much as you like, Thibault, for I am in your hands, but happily he is far from you, and you have no power over him." "And who told you that, Agneletta?" Do you not know that, thanks to the diabolical power I possess, and which I can hardly fight against, I am able to strike as well far as near? And if I should become a widow, Thibault, do you imagine that I should be vile enough to accept your hand when it was stained with the blood of the one whose name I bear?" "Agnelette," said Thibault, falling on his knees, "Agnelette, save me from committing a further crime." "It is you, not I, who will be responsible for the crime. I can give you my life, Thibault, but not my honor." "Ah!" roared Thibault, "love flies from the heart when hatred enters. Take care, Agnelette, take heed to your husband. The devil is in me, and he will soon speak through my mouth. Instead of the consolation which I had hoped from your love, and which your love refuses, I will have vengeance. Stay my hand, Agnelette, there is yet time. Stay it from cursing, from destroying. If not, understand that it is not I, but you, who strike him dead. Agnelette, you know now. Agnelette, you do not stop me from speaking? Let it be so then, and let the curse fall on all three of us, you and him and me. Agnelette, I wish your husband to die, and he will die." Agnelette uttered a terrible cry. Then, as if her reason reasserted itself, protesting against this murder at a distance, which seemed impossible to her, she exclaimed, "No, no, you only say that to terrify me, but my prayers will prevail against your maledictions." "Go then, and learn how heaven answers your prayers. Only if you wish to see your husband again alive, Agnelette, you had better make haste, or you will but stumble against his dead body." Overcome by the tone of conviction with which these last words were pronounced, and yielding to an irresistible feeling of terror, Agnelette, without responding to Thibault, who stood on the further side of the lane with his hand held out and pointing towards Preciamont, set off running in the direction which it seemed to indicate, and soon disappeared into the night as she turned out of sight at the corner of the road. As she passed from his view, Thibault uttered a howl which might have been taken for the howling of a whole pack of wolves, and plunging into the thicket, "Ah, now," he cried aloud to himself, "I am indeed a lost and accursed soul." End of chapter 21. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 22 of The Wolf Leader by Alexandre Dumas, translated by Alfred Allinson, 1852 to 1929. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 22. Thibault's Last Wish. Urged in her flight by a hideous terror and anxious to reach the village where she had left her husband with all speed possible, Agnelette, for the very reason that she was running so hastily, was forced by her failing breath to pause at intervals along the way. During these short spaces of rest, she endeavored to reason with herself, trying to convince herself of the folly of attaching importance to words which could have no power in themselves, and which were dictated by jealousy and hatred, words which had by now been scattered to the winds. But notwithstanding all her mental arguments, she had no sooner regained her breath than she started off again at the same precipitate pace, for she felt she should know no peace until she had seen her husband again. Best part of her way led through the forest and near the wildest and most solitary enclosures, but she gave no thought to the wolves, which were the terror of every town and village within 10 miles round. Only one fear possessed her, that of coming across her husband's dead body. More than once, as her foot struck against a stone or a branch, her heart stopped beating, and she felt as if her last breath had been drawn, while a sharp cold seemed to enter her very vitals. Her hair stood on end, and her face grew wet with perspiration. At last, at the end of the long path she had been traversing, arched over by the trees, she saw ahead of her a vista of open country lying bathed in the soft silver light of the moon. As she emerged from the gloom into the light, a man who had been concealed behind a bush in the hollow lying between the forest and the open country sprang in front of her and took her in his arms. "Ha, ha, ha, ha!" he said, laughing. "And where are you off to, madame, at this hour of night, and at this pace, too?" Agnelette recognized her husband. "Etienne! Dear, dear Etienne!" cried the young woman, throwing her arms round his neck. "How thankful I am to see you again, and to find you alive and well! Oh, my God, I thank thee!" "What? Did you think, you poor little Agnelette," said Engoulevent, "that Thibault and his wolves had been making their dinner of me?" "Ah, Do not even speak of Thibault, Etienne. Let us fly, dear one, fly to where there are houses." The young huntsman laughed again. "Well, now then, you will make all the gossips of Preciamont and Vez declare that a husband is of no use at all, not even to restore his wife's courage." "You are right, Etienne, but although I have just had the courage to come through these great dreadful woods, now that I have you with me and should feel reassured, I tremble with fear, and yet I know not why." "What has happened to you? Come, tell me all about it," said Etienne, giving his wife a kiss. Then Agnelette told him how she had been attacked by the wolf, how Thibault had rescued her from its claws, and what had passed between them afterwards. Engoulevent listened with the greatest attention. "Listen," he said to Agnelette, "I am going to take you home and shut you up carefully with the grandmother, so that no harm may come to you, and then I shall ride over and tell my Lord of Vez where Thibault has taken up his quarters." "Oh, no, no!" cried Agnelette. "You would have to ride through the forest, and there is no knowing what danger you might run." "I will make a detour," said Etienne. "I can go round by Croyolles and Value instead of crossing the forest." Agnelette sighed and shook her head, but made no further resistance. She knew that Engoulevent would not give in on this matter, and she reserved her strength wherewith to renew her entreaties when she was once indoors. And in truth, the young huntsman only considered that he was doing his duty, for a great battue had been arranged for the next day in a part of the forest on the furthest side from that on which Agnelette had met Thibault. Etienne, therefore, was bound to go without delay and report to his master the whereabouts of the wolf leader. There was not too much of the night left for the work of rearranging for tomorrow's battue. As they drew near Preciamont, Agnelette, who had not spoken for a while, decided that she had, during her silence, amassed a sufficient number of reasons to justify her in beginning her solicitations afresh, which she did with even more earnestness than she had put into her former arguments. She reminded Etienne that Thibault, even though he might be a werewolf, had, so far from hurting her, actually saved her life, and that after all, he had not abused his power when he had her in it, but had allowed her to leave him and rejoin her husband. And after that, to betray where he was to his mortal enemy, the Lord of Vez, was not performing a duty but committing an act of treachery. And Thibault, who would certainly get wind of this treachery, would never under similar circumstances show mercy to anyone again. Agnelette became quite eloquent as she pleaded Thibault's cause, but when marrying Engoulevent, she had made no more secret of her former engagement to the shoemaker than she had of his last interview with him, and however perfect a confidence he had in his wife, Engoulevent was nevertheless not unsusceptible to jealousy. More than that, there existed an old grudge between the two men, ever since the day when Engoulevent had spied out Thibault in his tree, and his boar spear in a neighboring bush. So he stood his ground, and though listening to Agnelette, continued to walk briskly towards Preciamont. And so, arguing together, and each insisting that he or she was in the right, they came to within a stone's throw of the first forest fences. To protect themselves as far as possible from Thibault's sudden and unexpected assaults, the peasants had instituted patrol parties, who mounted guard at night as in times of war. Etienne and Agnelette were so preoccupied with their discussion that they did not hear the call of "Who goes there?" from the sentinel behind the hedge, and went walking on in the direction of the village. The sentinel, seeing something moving in the darkness, which to his prepossessed imagination appeared to be a monstrous form of some kind, and hearing no answer to his challenge, he prepared to shoot. Looking up, at that moment the young huntsman suddenly caught sight of the sentinel, as the moonlight shone on the barrel of his gun. Calling out, "Friend!" he threw himself in front of Agnelette, flinging his arms round her so as to make a shield of his body. But at the same instant the gun went off, and the unfortunate Etienne, giving one last sigh, fell forward with a groan against the wife he was clasping in his arms. The bullet had pierced his heart. When the people of Preciamont, on hearing the gunshot, came running up to the spot, they found Engoulevent dead, and Agnelette lying unconscious beside her husband. They carried her to her grandmother's, but she only came to her senses to fall into a state of despair which bordered on delirium, and which at last became almost madness. She accused herself of her husband's death, called him by name, begged the invisible spirits which seemed to haunt her, even in the short intervals of slumber, which her excited state of brain made possible, to have mercy upon him. She called Thibault's name, and addressed such heartbroken supplications to him that those about her were moved to tears. By degrees, in spite of the incoherence of her words, the real facts became evident, and it grew to be generally understood that the wolf leader was in some way accountable for the unhappy accident which had caused poor Etienne's death. The common enemy was therefore accused of having cast a spell over the two unfortunate young creatures, and the animosity felt toward the former shoemaker became intensified. In vain doctors were sent for from Villers-Cotterets and Fertemillon. Agnelette became worse and worse, her strength was rapidly failing, her voice after the first few days grew feebler, her breath shorter, although her delirium was as violent as ever, and everything, even the silence on the doctor's part, led to the belief that poor Agnelette would soon follow her husband to the grave. The voice of the old blind woman alone seemed to have any power to allay the fever. When she heard her grandmother speaking, she grew calmer, the haggard staring eyes grew softer and suffused with tears. She would pass her hand over her forehead as if to drive away some haunting thought, and a sorrowful, wandering smile would pass across her lips. One evening, towards night, her slumber seemed to be more agitated and distressed than usual. The hut, feebly lit by a little copper lamp, was in semi-darkness. The grandmother sat by the hearth, with that immobility of countenance under which peasants and savages hide their strongest feelings. At the foot of the bed on which Agnelette lay, so worn and white that, had it not been for the regular rise and fall of her bosom with its troubled breathing, you might have taken her for dead, knelt one of those women whom the Baron was paying to attend upon the widow of his young huntsman engaged in telling her beads. The other was silently spinning with her distaff. All at once the sick woman, who for some minutes past had been shivering at intervals, seemed to be fighting against some horrible dream, and gave a piercing cry of anguish. At that moment the door burst open, a man seemingly encircled by flames rushed into the room, leapt to Agnelette's bed, clasped the dying woman in his arms, pressed his lips upon her forehead, uttering cries of sorrow, then rushing to another door which gave on to the open country, opened it and disappeared. The apparition had come and gone so quickly that it seemed almost like an hallucination, and as if Agnelette were endeavoring to repulse some invisible object as she cried out, "Take him away! Take him away!" But the two watchers had seen the man and had recognized Thibault, and there was a clamoring outside, in the midst of which the name of Thibault could be distinguished. Soon the clamor came nearer to Agnelette's hut, and those who were uttering the cries ere long appeared on the threshold. They were in pursuit of the wolf leader. Thibault had been seen prowling in the neighborhood of the hut, and the villagers, warned of this by their sentinels, had armed themselves with pitchforks and sticks, preparatory to giving him chase. Thibault, hearing of the hopeless condition in which Agnelette was, had not been able to resist his longing to see her once again, and at the risk of what might happen to him, he had passed through the village, trusting to the rapidity of his movements, had opened the door of the hut, and rushed in to see the dying woman. The two women showed the peasants the door by which Thibault had escaped, and like a pack that has recovered the scent, they started afresh on his track with renewed cries and threats. Thibault, it need hardly be said, escaped from them and disappeared in the forest. Agnelette's condition, after the terrible shock given her by Thibault's presence and embrace, became so alarming that before the night was over the priest was sent for. She had evidently now but a few hours longer to live and suffer. Towards midnight the priest arrived, followed by the sacristan carrying the cross, and the choir boys bearing the holy water. These went and knelt at the foot of the bed, while the priest took his place at the head beside Agnelette, and now some mysterious power seemed to reanimate the dying woman. For a long time she spoke in a low voice with the priest, and as the poor child had no need of long prayers for herself, it was certain that she must be praying for another. And who was that other? God, the priest, and Agnelette alone knew. End of chapter 22. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 23 of The Wolf Leader by Alexandre DUMAS, translated by Alfred, 1852 to 1929. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 23. The Anniversary. As soon as Thibault ceased to hear the furious cries of his pursuers behind him, he slackened his pace, and the usual silence again reigning throughout the forest, he paused and sat down on a heap of stones. He was in such a troubled state of mind that he did not recognize where he was until he began to notice that some of the stones were blackened, as if they had been licked by flames. They were the stones of his own former hearth. Chance had led him to the spot where, a few months previously, his hut had stood. The shoemaker evidently felt the bitterness of the comparison between the peaceful past and this terrible present, for large tears rolled down his cheeks and fell upon the cinders at his feet. He heard midnight strike from the Wagny church clock, then one after the other from the other neighboring village towers. At this moment the priest was listening to Agnelette's dying prayers. "Cursed be the day," cried Thibault, "when I first wished for anything beyond what God chooses to put within the reach of a poor workman. Cursed be the day when the black wolf gave me the power to do evil, for the ill that I have done, instead of adding to my happiness, has destroyed it forever." A loud laugh was heard behind Thibault's back. He turned. There was the black wolf himself, creeping noiselessly along like a dog coming to rejoin its master. The wolf would have been invisible in the gloom but for the flames shot forth from his eyes, which illuminated the darkness. He went round the hearth and sat down facing the shoemaker. "What's this?" he said. "Master Thibault not satisfied? It seems that Master Thibault is difficult to please." "How can I feel satisfied?" said Thibault. "I, who since I first met you have known nothing but vain aspirations and endless regrets. I wished for riches, and here I am in despair at having lost the humble roof of bracken under shelter, of which I could sleep in peace, without anxiety as to the morrow, without troubling myself about the rain or the wind beating against the branches of the giant oaks. I wished for position, and here I am, stoned and hunted down by the lowest peasants, whom formerly I despised. I asked for love, and the only woman who loved me, and whom I loved, became the wife of another, and she is at this moment cursing me as she lies dying, while I, notwithstanding all the power you have given me, can do nothing to help her." "Leave off loving anybody but yourself, Thibault." "Oh, yes, laugh at me, do." "I'm not laughing at you. But you do not cast envious eyes on other people's property before you had set eyes on me?" "Yes, for a wretched buck, of which there are hundreds just as good browsing in the forest." "You thought your wishes were going to stop at the buck, Thibault, but wishes lead on to one another, as the night to the day and the day to the night. When you wished for the buck, you also wished for the silver dish on which it would be served. The silver dish led you on to wish for the servant who carries it and for the carver who cuts up its contents. Ambition is like the vault of heaven. It appears to be bounded by the horizon, but it covers the whole earth. You disdained Agnelette's innocence and went after Madame Poulet's mill. If you had gained the mill, you would immediately have wanted the house of the bailiff Magloire, and his house would have had no further attraction for you when once you had seen the castle of Montgobert. You are one in your envious disposition with the fallen angel, your master and mine. Only as you were not clever enough to reap the benefit that might have accrued to you from your power of inflicting evil, it would perhaps have been more to your interest to continue to lead an honest life." "Yes, indeed," replied the shoemaker. "I feel the truth of the proverb, evil to him who evil wishes." But he continued, "Can I not become an honest man again?" The wolf gave a mocking chuckle. "My good fellow, the devil can drag a man to hell," he said, "by a single hair. Have you ever counted how many of yours now belong to him?" "No." "I cannot tell you that exactly either, but I know how many you have which are still your own. You have one left. You see, it is long past the time for repentance." "But if a man is lost when but one of his hairs belongs to the devil," said Thibault, "why cannot God likewise save a man in virtue of a single hair?" "Well, try, if that is so." "And besides, when I concluded that unhappy bargain with you, I did not understand that it was to be a compact of this kind." "Oh yes, I know all about the bad faith of you men. Was it no compact, then, to consent to give me your hairs, you stupid fool? Since men invented baptism, we do not know how to get hold of them, and so in return for any concessions we make them, we are bound to insist on their relinquishing to us some part of their body on which we can lay hands. You gave us the hairs of your head, they are firmly rooted, as you have proved yourself, and will not come away in our grasp. No, no, Thibault, you have belonged to us ever since, standing on the threshold of the door that was once there, you cherished within you thoughts of deceit and violence." "And so," cried Thibault passionately, rising and stamping his foot, "and so I am lost as regards the next world without having enjoyed the pleasures of this?" "You can yet enjoy these." "And how, I pray?" "By boldly following the path that you have struck by chance, and resolutely determining on a course of conduct which you have adopted as yet only in a half-hearted way. In short, by frankly owning yourself to be one of us." "And how am I to do this?" "Take my place." "And what then?" "You will then acquire my power, and you will have nothing left to wish for." "If your power is so great, if it can give you all the riches that I long for, why do you give it up?" "Do not trouble yourself about me. The master for whom I shall have won a retainer will liberally reward me." "And if I take your place, shall I also have to take your form?" "Yes, in the night time. By day you will be a man again." "The nights are long, dark, full of snares. I may be brought down by a bullet from a keeper, or be caught in a trap, and then goodbye riches, goodbye position and pleasure." "Not so. For this skin that covers me is impenetrable by iron, lead, or steel. As long as it protects your body, you will be not only invulnerable, but immortal. Once a year, like all werewolves, you will become a wolf again for 24 hours, and during that interval you will be in danger of death like any other animal. I had just reached that dangerous time a year ago today, when we first met." "Ah," said Thibault, "that explains why you feared my Lord Baron's dogs." "When we have dealings with men, we are forbidden to speak anything but the truth and the whole truth. It is for them to accept or refuse." "You have boasted to me of the power that I should acquire. Tell me now in what that power will consist." "It will be such that even the most powerful king will not be able to withstand it, since his power is limited by the human and the possible." "Shall I be rich?" "So rich that you will come in time to despise riches, since by the mere force of your will you will obtain not only what men can only acquire with gold and silver, but also all that superior beings get by their conjurations." "Shall I be able to revenge myself on my enemies?" "You will have unlimited power over everything which is connected with evil." "If I love a woman, will there again be a possibility of my losing her?" "As you will have dominion over all your fellow creatures, you will be able to do with them what you like." "There will be no power to enable them to escape from the trammels of my will?" "Nothing, except death, which is stronger than all." "And I shall only run the risk of death myself on one day out of the 365? "On one day only. During the remaining days nothing can harm you, neither iron, lead, nor steel, neither water nor fire." "And there is no deceit, no trap to catch me in your words?" "None, on my honor as a wolf." "Good," said Thibault. "Then let it be so, a wolf for 24 hours, for the rest of the time the monarch of creation. What am I to do? I am ready." "Pick a holly leaf, tear it in 3 pieces with your teeth, and throw it away from you as far as you can." Thibault did as he was commanded. Having torn the leaf in 3 pieces, he scattered them on the air, and although the night till then had been a peaceful one, there was immediately heard a loud peal of thunder, while a tempestuous whirlwind arose, which caught up the fragments and carried them whirling away with it. "And now, brother Thibault," said the wolf, "take my place, and good luck be with you. As was my case just a year ago, so you will have to become a wolf for 24 hours. You must endeavor to come out of the ordeal as happily as I did, thanks to you, and then you will see realized all that I have promised you. Meanwhile, I will pray the Lord of the Cloven Hoof that he will protect you from the teeth of the Baron's hounds, for, by the devil himself, I take a genuine interest in you, friend Thibault." And then it seemed to Thibault that he saw the black wolf grow larger and taller, that it stood up on its hind legs, and finally walked away in the form of a man, who made a sign to him with his hand as he disappeared. We say, "it seemed to him," for Thibault's ideas for a second or two became very indistinct. A feeling of torpor passed over him, paralyzing his power of thought. When he came to himself, he was alone, his limbs were imprisoned in a new and unusual form. He had, in short, become in every respect the counterpart of the black wolf that a few minutes before had been speaking to him. One single white hair on his head alone shone in contrast to the remainder of the sombre-colored fur. This one white hair of the wolf was the one black hair which had remained to the man. Thibault had scarcely had time to recover himself when he fancied he heard a rustling among the bushes and the sound of a low, muffled bark. He thought of the Baron and his hounds, and trembled. Thus metamorphosed into the black wolf, he decided that he would not do what his predecessor had done, and wait till the dogs were upon him. It was probably a bloodhound he had heard, and he would get away before the hounds were uncoupled. He made off, striking straight ahead, as is the manner of wolves, and it was a profound satisfaction to him to find that in his new form he had tenfold his former strength and elasticity of limb. "By the devil in his horns!" the voice of the Lord of Vez was now heard to say to his new huntsman a few paces off. "You hold the leash too slack, my lad. You have let the bloodhound give tongue, and we shall never head the wolf back now." "I was in fault, do not deny it, my lord. But as I saw it go by last evening only a few yards from this spot, I never guessed that it would take up its quarters for the night in this part of the wood, and that it was so close to us as all that." "Are you sure it is the same one that has got away from us so often?" "May the bread I eat in your service choke me, my lord, if it is not the same black wolf that we were chasing last year when poor Marcotte was drowned." "I should like finally to put the dogs on its track," said the Baron with a sigh. "My lord has but to give the order, and we will do so, but he will allow me to observe that we have still 2 good hours of darkness before us, time enough for every horse we have to break its legs." "That may be, but if we wait for the day, l'Éveillé, the fellow will have had time to get 10 leagues away." "10 leagues at least," said l'Éveillé, shaking his head. "I have got this cursed black wolf on my brain," added the Baron, "and I have such a longing to have it skinned that I feel sure I shall catch an illness if I do not get hold of it." "Well then, my lord, let us have the dogs out without a moment's loss of time." "You are right, l'Éveillé, go and fetch the hounds." L'Éveillé went back to his horse that he had tied to a tree outside the wood, and went off at a gallop, and in 10 minutes' time, which seemed like 10 centuries to the Baron, he was back with the whole hunting train. The hounds were immediately uncoupled. "Gently, gently, my lads," said the Lord of Vez. "You forget you are not handling your old, well-trained dogs. If you get excited with these raw recruits, they'll merely kick up a devil of a row, and be no more good than so many turnspits. Let 'em get warmed up by degrees." And indeed, the dogs were no sooner loose than 2 or 3 got at once onto the scent of the werewolf and began to give cry, whereupon the others joined them. The whole pack started off on Thibault's track, at first quietly following up the scent, and only giving cry at long intervals, then more excitedly and of more accord, until they had so thoroughly imbibed the odor of the wolf ahead of them, and the scent had become so strong that they tore along, baying furiously and with unparalleled eagerness in the direction of the Ivor coppice. "Well begun is half done," cried the Baron. "You look after the relays, l'Éveillé. I want them ready whenever needed. I will encourage the dogs, and you be on alert, you others," he added, addressing himself to the younger keepers. "We have more than one defeat to avenge, and if I lose this view, halloo, through the fault of anyone among you, by the devil in his horns, he shall be the dog's quarry in place of the wolf." After pronouncing these words of encouragement, the Baron put his horse to the gallop, and although it was still pitch dark and the ground was rough, he kept the animal going at top speed so as to come up with the hounds, which could be heard giving tongue in the lowlands about Bourg Fontaine. End of chapter 23. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 24 of The Wolf Leader by Alexandre Dumas, translated by Alfred Allinson, 1852–1929. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia. Chapter 24. Hunting down the werewolf. Thibault had got well ahead of the dogs, thanks to the precaution he had taken of making good his escape at the first note of the bloodhound. For some time he heard no further sound of pursuit, but all at once, like distant thunder, the baying of the hounds reached his ears, and he began to feel some anxiety. He had been trotting, but he now went on at a greater speed, and did not pause till he had put a few more leagues between himself and his enemies. Then he stood still and took his bearings. He found himself on the heights at Montaigu. He bent his head and listened. The dogs still seemed a long way off, somewhere near the Tillet coppice. It required a wolf's ear to distinguish them so far off. Thibault went down the hill again, as if to meet the dogs. Then, leaving Erneville to the left, he leapt into the little stream which rises there, waded down its course as far as Grimalcourt, dashed into the woods of Lessart-la-Besse, and finally gained the forest of Compiègne. He was somewhat reassured to find that in spite of his 3 hours' hard running, the steel-like muscles of his wolf legs were not in the least fatigued. He hesitated, however, to trust himself in a forest which was not so familiar to him as that of Villers-Cotterets. After another dash of a mile or so, he decided that by doubling boldly he would be most likely to put the dogs off the scent. He crossed at a gallop all the stretch of plain between Pierrefonds and Montgobert, took to the woods at the Champ Moutard, came out again at Vauvaudrand, regained the stream by the Saint-Cyrus timber floatage, and once more found himself in the forest near Longpont. Unfortunately for him, just as he reached the end of the Route de Pendu, he came across another pack of 20 dogs, which Monsieur de Montbreton's huntsman was bringing up as a relay, for the Baron had sent his neighbor news of the chase. Instantly the hounds were uncoupled by the huntsman as he caught sight of the wolf, for seeing that the latter kept its distance, he feared it would get too far ahead if he waited for the others to come up before loosing his dogs. And now began the struggle between the werewolf and the dogs in very earnest. It was a wild chase, which the horses, in spite of their skilled riders, had great difficulty in following, a chase over plains, through woods, across heaths, pursued at a headlong pace. As the hunt flew by, it appeared and disappeared like a flash of lightning across a cloud, leaving behind a whirlwind of dust, and a sound of horns and cries which Echo had hardly time to repeat. It rushed over hill and dale, through torrents and bogs, and over precipices, as if horses and dogs had been winged like hippogriffs and chimeras. The Baron had come up with his huntsman riding at their head, and almost riding on the tails of his dogs, his eye flashing, his nostrils dilated, exciting the pack with wild shouts and furious blasts, digging his spurs into his horse's side whenever an obstacle of any kind caused it to hesitate for a single instant. The black wolf on his side still held on at the same rapid pace, although sorely shaken at hearing the fresh pack in full pursuit only a short way behind him. Just as he had got back to the forest, he had not lost an inch of ground. As he retained to the full all his human consciousness, it seemed to him impossible, as he still ran on, that he should not escape in safety from this ordeal. He felt that it was not possible for him to die before he had taken vengeance for all the agony that others had made him suffer, before he had known those pleasures that had been promised him, above all, for at this critical moment his thoughts kept on running on this, before he had gained Agnelette's love. At moments he was possessed by terror, at others by anger. He thought at times that he would turn and face this yelling pack of dogs, and forgetting his present form, scatter them with stones and blows. Then, an instant after, feeling mad with rage, deafened by the death knell the hounds were ringing in his ears, he fled, he leaped, he flew with the legs of a deer, with the wings of an eagle. But his efforts were in vain. He might run, leap, almost fly. The sounds of death still clung to him, and if for a moment they became more distant, it was only to hear them a moment after nearer and more threatening still. But still the instinct of self-preservation did not fail him, and still his strength was undiminished. Only if by ill luck he were to come across other relays, he felt that it might give way. So he determined to take a bold course, so as to outdistance the dogs, and to get back to his lairs, where he knew his ground and hoped to evade the dogs. He therefore doubled for the second time. He first ran back to Puiseux, then skirted past Viviers, regained the forest of Compiègne, made a dash into the forest of Largue, returned and crossed the Aisne and Attichy, and finally got back to the forest of Villers-Cotterets at the lowlands of Argent. He trusted in this way to baffle the strategical plans of the Lord of Vez, who had no doubt posted his dogs at various likely points. Once back in his old quarters, Thibault breathed more freely. He was now on the banks of the Ourcq, between Norry and Trouenne, where the river runs at the foot of deep rocks on either side. He leapt up onto a sharp-pointed crag overhanging the water, and from this high vantage ground he sprang into the waves below, then swam to a crevice at the base of the rock from which he had leapt, which was situated rather below the ordinary level of the water, and here, at the back of this cave, he waited. He had gained at least 3 miles upon the dogs, and yet scarcely another 10 minutes had elapsed when the whole pack arrived and stormed the crest of the rock. Those who were leading, mad with excitement, did not see the gulf in front of them, or else, like their quarry, they thought they would leap safely into it, for they plunged, and Thibault was splashed, far back as he was hidden, by the water that was scattered in every direction as they fell into it one by one. Less fortunate, however, and less vigorous than he was, they were unable to fight against the current, and after vainly battling with it, they were borne along out of sight before they had even got scent of the werewolf's retreat. Overhead he could hear the tramping of the horses' feet, the baying of the dogs that were still left, the cries of men, and above all these sounds, dominating the other voices, that of the Baron as he cursed and swore. When the last dog had fallen into the water and been carried away like the others, he saw, thanks to a bend in the river, that the huntsmen were going down it, and persuaded that the Baron, whom he recognized at the head of his hunting train, would only do this with the intention of coming up it again, he determined not to wait for this, and left his hiding place. Now swimming, now leaping with agility from one rock to the other, at times wading through the water, he went up the river to the end of the Cren coppice. Certain that he had now made a considerable advance to his enemies, he resolved to get to one of the villages near and run in and out among the houses, feeling sure that they would not think of coming after him there. He thought of Preciamont. If any village was well known to him, it was that, and then at Preciamont he would be near Agnelette. He felt that this neighborhood would put fresh vigor into him, and would bring him good fortune, and that the gentle image of the innocent girl would have some influence on his fate. So he started off in that direction. It was now 6 o'clock in the evening. The hunt had lasted nearly 15 hours, and wolf, dogs, and huntsmen had covered 50 leagues at least. When at last, after circling round by Manereux and Oigny, the black wolf reached the borders of the heath by the lane of Ham, the sun was already beginning to sink, and shedding a dazzling light over the flowery plain. The little white and pink flowers scented the breeze that played caressingly around them. The grasshopper was singing in its little house of moss, and the lark was soaring up towards heaven, saluting the eye with its song as 12 hours before it had saluted the morn. The peaceful beauty of nature had a strange effect on Thibault. It seemed enigmatical to him that nature could be so smiling and beautiful, while anguish such as his was devouring his soul. He saw the flowers and heard the insects and the birds, and he compared the quiet joy of this innocent world with the horrible pangs he was enduring, and asked himself whether, after all, notwithstanding all the new promises that had been made him by the devil's envoy, he had acted any more wisely in making this second compact than he had in making the first. He began to doubt whether he might not find himself deceived in the one as he had been in the other. As he went along a little footpath nearly hidden under the golden broom, he suddenly remembered that it was by this very path that he had taken Agnelette home on the first day of their acquaintance, the day when, inspired by his good angel, he had asked her to be his wife. The thought that thanks to this new compact he might be able to recover Agnelette's love revived his spirits, which had been saddened and depressed by the sight of the universal happiness around him. He heard the church bells at Preciamont ringing in the valley below. Its solemn, monotonous tones recalled the thought of his fellow men to the black wolf, and of all he had to fear from them. So he ran boldly on across the fields to the village, where he hoped to find a refuge in some empty building. As he was skirting the little stone wall of the village cemetery, he heard a sound of voices approaching along the road he was in. He could not fail to meet whoever they might be who were coming towards him, if he himself went on. It was not safe to turn back, as he would have to cross some rising ground, whence he might easily be seen. So there was nothing left for it but to jump over the wall of the cemetery, and with a bound he was on the other side. This graveyard, as usual, adjoined the church. It was uncared for and overgrown with tall grass, while brambles and thorns grew rankly in places. The wolf made for the thickest of these bramble bushes. He found a sort of ruined vault, whence he could look out without being seen, and he crept under the branches and hid himself inside. A few yards away from him was a newly dug grave. Within the church could be heard the chanting of the priests, the more distinctly that the vault must at one time have communicated by a passage with the crypt. Presently the chanting ceased, and the black wolf, who did not feel quite at ease in the neighborhood of a church, and thought that the road must now be clear, decided that it was time to start off again and to find a safer retreat than the one he had fled to in his haste. But he had scarcely got his nose outside the bramble bush when the gate of the cemetery opened, and he quickly retreated again to his hole, in great trepidation as to who might now be approaching. The first person he saw was a child dressed in a white alb, and carrying a vessel of holy water. He was followed by a man in a surplice, bearing a silver cross, and after the latter came a priest, chanting the psalms for the dead. Behind these were 4 peasants carrying a bier covered with a white pall, over which were scattered green branches and flowers, and beneath the sheet could be seen the outline of a coffin. A few villagers from Préquemont wound up this little procession. Although there was nothing unusual in such a sight as this, seeing that he was in a cemetery and that the newly dug grave must have prepared him for it, Thibault nevertheless felt strangely moved as he looked on. Although the slightest movement might betray his presence and bring destruction upon him, he anxiously watched every detail of the ceremony. The priest having blessed the newly made grave, the peasants laid down their burden on an adjoining hillock. It is the custom in our country, when a young girl or young married woman dies in the fullness of her youth and beauty, to carry her to the graveyard in an open coffin, with only a pall over her, so that her friends may bid her a last farewell, her relations give her a last kiss. Then the coffin is nailed down, and all is over. An old woman, led by some kind hand, for she was apparently blind, went up to the coffin to give the dead one a last kiss. The peasants lifted the pall from the still face, and there lay Agnelette. A low groan escaped from Thibault's agonized breast and mingled with the tears and sobs of those present. Agnelette, as she lay there so pale in death, wrapped in an ineffable calm, appeared more beautiful than when in life, beneath her wreath of forget-me-nots and daisies. As Thibault looked upon the poor dead girl, his heart seemed suddenly to melt within him. It was he, as he had truly realized, who had really killed her, and he experienced a genuine and overpowering sorrow, the more poignant since for the first time for many long months he forgot to think of himself, and thought only of the dead woman, now lost to him forever. As he heard the blows of the hammer knocking the nails into the coffin, as he heard the earth and stones being shoveled into the grave and falling with a dull thud onto the body of the only woman he had ever loved, a feeling of giddiness came over him. The hard stones, he thought, must be bruising Agnelette's tender flesh, so fresh and sweet but a few days ago, and only yesterday still throbbing with life, and he made a movement as if to rush out on the assailants and snatch away the body, which dead must surely belong to him, since living it had belonged to another. But the grief of the man overcame this instinct of the wild beast at bay. A shudder passed through the body hidden beneath its wolfskin. Tears fell from the fierce blood-red eyes, and the unhappy man cried out, "O God, take my life! I give it gladly, if only by my death I may give back life to her whom I killed." The words were followed by such an appalling howl that all who were in the cemetery fled, and the place was left utterly deserted. Almost at the same moment, the hounds, having recovered the scent, came leaping in over the wall, followed by the Baron, streaming with sweat as he rode his horse, which was covered with foam and blood. The dogs made straight for the bramble bush, and began worrying something hidden there. "Halloo! halloo! halloo!" cried the Lord of Vez in a voice of thunder, as he leapt from his horse, not caring if there was anyone or not to look after it, and drawing out his hunting knife, he dashed towards the vault. Forcing his way through the hounds, he found them fighting over a fresh and bleeding wolf-skin, but the body had disappeared. There was no mistake as to its being the skin of the werewolf that they had been hunting, for with the exception of one white hair, it was entirely black. What had become of the body? No one ever knew. Only as from this time forth Thibault was never seen again. It was generally believed that the former sabot maker and no other was the werewolf. Furthermore, as the skin had been found without the body, and as from the spot where it was found a peasant reported to have heard someone speak the words, "O God, take my life, I give it gladly, if only by my death I may give back life to her whom I have killed," the priest declared openly that Thibault, by reason of his sacrifice and repentance, had been saved. And what added to the consistency of belief in this tradition was, that every year on the anniversary of Agnelette's death, up to the time when the monasteries were all abolished at the Revolution, a monk from the abbey of Premonstratensian at Bourg-Fontaine, which stands half a league from Préquemont, was seen to come and pray beside her grave. Such is the history of the Black Wolf, as it was told me by old Mocquet, my father's keeper. End of The Wolf Leader, by Alexandre Dumas, translated by Alfred Allinson, 1852 to 1929. Recording by John Van Stan, Savannah, Georgia.